Hey, Grandma, what's your rank? Do they give you one for making the coffee? The question, sharp and dripping with the casual cruelty of youthful arrogance, sliced through the low hum of the Naval Special Warfare dining facility. The crowd laughed. It wasn't a malicious laugh from most. It was the reflexive, pack-animal response to a perceived display of dominance from one of their own, a young lion making a show of his place in the pride. Petty Officer Second Class Jake, Maverick Donovan, his call sign as subtle as his personality, grinned, basking in the brief ripple of approval from the tables of younger SEALs around him. He stood over a small, solitary table, his shadow falling across a woman who seemed entirely out of place. She appeared to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, her hair a practical cut with distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. She wore a set of plain, gray coveralls, the kind a maintenance worker or a civilian contractor might wear, stained with a faint, almost invisible patina of grease and solvent around the cuffs. A pair of simple reading glasses were perched on her nose, and she was engrossed in what looked like a thick, technical manual, its pages dense with schematics and lines of code. But she offered zero verbal or emotional reaction to the jibe. Her shoulders didn't tense. Her head didn't lift. The only movement was the slow, deliberate turn of a page, a gesture of such profound indifference that it was, in itself, a form of defiance. The air around her table became a vacuum of calm in the boisterous, testosterone-fueled atmosphere of the Coronado DFAC. It was a space filled with men whose entire existence was predicated on action, on kinetic energy, on being the loudest, fastest, and most lethal presence in any room. Their conversations were a staccato burst of debriefs, training jargon, and competitive banter. The clatter of trays and cutlery was the background rhythm to a culture of supreme confidence. Yet, this woman, with her quiet focus and unassuming presence, created a small island of stillness that was more noticeable than any shout. But when the retired Force Master Chief, a visiting legend named Thorne who sat quietly in a corner observing the next generation, saw her posture, a forgotten memory sparked in the back of his mind. He saw not an old woman, but a posture of absolute economy. The way her back was perfectly straight but relaxed, the way her hand rested on the page, ready to turn with minimal effort, the intense, unblinking focus of her eyes scanning the text. It wasn't the posture of a cook or a janitor. It was the practiced stillness of someone who had spent thousands of hours waiting, watching, and thinking in high-stakes environments where an unnecessary movement could mean the difference between life and death. He saw a professional. The young SEAL, Donovan, saw none of this. He saw only what his assumptions allowed him to see: an obstacle, an anomaly, a civilian who didn't understand the sacredness of this space. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence, not demanded by shouting, type competence below. Donovan, emboldened by the laughter and her infuriating silence, decided to double down. He leaned forward, planting his palms on her small table, a clear invasion of her space. The metal legs of the table scraped against the tile, a jarring sound in the otherwise steady din. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice lower now, more insistent, a predator moving in. "This is a dining facility for operators, not a library for whatever it is you do. Pushing a broom? Fixing a leaky faucet? You must be one of the new civilian hires. They'll let anyone on base these days." He gestured expansively with one hand, addressing his audience of smirking teammates. "See, this is the problem. The line gets blurry. People forget who this place is for. It's for us, the guys who go downrange, the guys who get their hands dirty for real, not with a wrench." He tapped the cover of her thick manual with a single, condescending finger. "What's this? The instruction manual for the new floor buffer? You gotta read a book that thick just to figure out how to turn on." He was performing, using her as a prop in a play about his own importance. Her stillness was a canvas, and he was desperately trying to paint his superiority onto it. He spoke of the new breed of warrior, faster, stronger, more technologically adept, implicitly casting her as a relic of a bygone, irrelevant era. But Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Reed simply continued to read. Her focus was so absolute, it was almost unnerving. The words on the page were her world. The noise around her was just distant weather. To Donovan, this wasn't just silence. It was a challenge. It was the ultimate dismissal. A qualified SEAL, a man who had survived the brutal crucible of BUD/S and was part of the most elite fighting force on the planet, was being utterly and completely ignored by a woman he had already categorized and dismissed as insignificant. The amused smirks on the faces of his friends began to morph into something else, a flicker of discomfort, a nascent sense of an unwritten rule being broken. There was confidence, and then there was this. This was a violation not just of decorum, but of a deeper, unspoken military code that warned against underestimating anyone on a base like this. Every person, from the four-star admiral to the civilian groundskeeper, was a piece of the vast, complex machine. To openly disrespect one piece was to show ignorance of how the whole machine worked. Eve finally finished her paragraph. She took a slow, methodical sip of her water. Then, without looking up, she turned another page. The crisp sound of the paper was louder than any word she could have spoken. It was a declaration that his entire performance, his blustering monologue, was less important than the next sentence in her manual. The tension at the table became a palpable thing, a heavy weight pressing down, and Donovan, standing in the silence she had created, suddenly looked less like a lion and more like a boy who had shouted into a canyon and was terrified by the echo of his own voice. Suddenly, the world tore itself apart. A klaxon, a sound utterly distinct from the routine training alarms, began to blare through the facility. It was a high-pitched, frantic, and deeply wrong sound, accompanied by flashing red lights that bathed the cafeteria in a hellish pulse. On the large monitors that usually displayed base announcements and news, a single phrase appeared in stark, block letters: Hyperion Chamber, catastrophic failure. Containment Protocol Alpha. This is not a drill. A cold dread instantly replaced the casual atmosphere. The Hyperion Chamber was the crown jewel of NSW training, a state-of-the-art combat simulator that could replicate any environment on Earth, from the crushing depths of the ocean to the thin air of the Himalayas, while simultaneously running complex tactical scenarios. It wasn't a video game. It was a fully immersive system that manipulated temperature, atmosphere, and physical structures using a cocktail of advanced robotics, virtual reality, and environmental controls. And a team was inside. A frantic voice crackled over the base-wide PA system, strained with panic. All technical personnel to Hyperion Control now. We have a system lockdown. Feedback loop is critical. Life support is failing. Donovan and his team, who had been next on the schedule to use the simulator, were already moving. They sprinted from the DFAC, the memory of their petty drama instantly erased by the surge of adrenaline. They arrived at the massive, windowless blockhouse that contained the simulator to a scene of organized chaos. Technicians were running back and forth, shouting jargon into headsets, their faces pale with stress. The main entrance to the chamber, a multi-ton blast door, was sealed shut, a single red light glowing above it. Through a small, reinforced observation window, they could see frost beginning to form on the inside. Donovan, reverting to his nature as a man of action, immediately started making suggestions. We need to breach the door. Get the cutting torches. C4. We can pop it open. An older, panicked technician, the civilian lead for the system, shook his head frantically. No, you can't. The chamber's internal atmosphere is becoming unstable. A sudden breach could cause an explosive decompression. Plus, the lockdown protocols have engaged the physical denial systems. The walls are live. You'll be electrocuted before you get within 5 feet. The situation was impossible. The men inside were trapped in a rapidly freezing, suffocating environment, and any attempt to physically rescue them could kill the rescuers and potentially the men inside even faster. The system that was designed to make them invincible was now the perfect trap. In the midst of the escalating panic, a figure of absolute calm moved through the frantic crowd of technicians and operators. It was the woman from the cafeteria, Evelyn Reed. She had her reading glasses tucked into the collar of her gray coveralls and the thick technical manual held loosely in one hand. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace, her eyes not on the panicked faces around her, but on the flickering status lights and the readouts on the secondary monitors. A young officer tried to stop her, putting a hand on her arm. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to clear out." She didn't even look at him. She simply moved past him as if he were a ghost, her focus so intense that it created its own invisible shield. She entered the Hyperion control room, a space that was now a cacophony of alarms and shouting. The lead technician was on the verge of total meltdown, his hands hovering uselessly over a keyboard that flashed with error messages. "It's not responding. The manual overrides are locked out. The source code it's rewriting itself." Eve walked directly to the main console, the nerve center of the entire multi-million-dollar system. She placed her manual on a small, clear space to the side, opening it to a bookmark page filled with dense, algorithmic language. The technicians and SEALs, including a now bewildered Donovan, watched her, a mixture of annoyance and disbelief on their faces. What could this old woman possibly do? But then her hands moved. The hands they had dismissed as old and worn, the hands they had mocked as belonging to a janitor, became a blur of precise, controlled motion. She didn't reach for the mouse. Her fingers danced across the command line interface, a black screen with glowing green text that was the machine's primordial language. She wasn't typing commands. She was composing a symphony. Lines of code, complex and alien to everyone else in the room, scrolled up the screen at an impossible speed. She was arguing with the machine in its native tongue, countering its corrupted logic, rewriting its suicidal directives on the fly. The frantic beeping of the alarms began to change pitch, becoming less chaotic, more rhythmic. The flashing red lights steadied, then turned to a solid, hopeful amber. With a final, decisive keystroke, she entered one last line of code. There was a moment of absolute electronic silence. Then a single calm, synthesized female voice filled the room. "System override accepted. Safe mode engaged. Purging atmosphere and stabilizing temperature. Lockdown protocols disengaged." With a deep, pneumatic hiss, the massive blast door to the Hyperion chamber began to slide open. The trapped SEAL team stumbled out, shivering, gasping for fresh air, but alive. In the control room, a profound, deafening silence fell. Every single person, technician, officer, and SEAL, was staring at the unassuming woman in the gray coveralls, who was now calmly closing her manual. Donovan stood frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open. The world had just been saved not by a breach, not by an explosion, not by kinetic force, but by a quiet woman and a keyboard. The impossible had not only happened, it had been done with quiet competence. Just as the collective shock began to subside, a new presence entered the control room, parting the stunned crowd like a ship through water. It was Master Chief Thorne, the retired but still revered former Force Master Chief for Naval Special Warfare. He was a man who carried his legend lightly, but whose presence commanded an immediate, almost gravitational respect. He had been on base, conducting a leadership seminar for young officers when he heard the alert. His face was a mask of calm authority, his eyes missing nothing. He didn't look at the trembling, rescue team. He didn't look at the now rebooting console. He didn't look at the relieved base commander who was rushing towards him, babbling about a disaster being averted. His gaze went directly, unerringly, to one person, Evelyn Reed. She was standing by the console, wiping a smudge of dust from her glasses with a corner of her coveralls, the picture of placid normality after performing a technological miracle. Thorne stopped a few feet from her, and a slow, subtle change came over his features. It was a flicker of recognition, a dawning of understanding that connected a face from the present to a name from a deep, classified past. He saw her, and for the first time that day, someone truly saw her. He saw past the gray coveralls, past the reading glasses, past the streaks of silver in her hair. His eyes, trained to spot the smallest detail, settled on a tiny pin affixed to her collar. almost perfectly hidden in the worn fabric. It was a small, stylized gear, intricately machined from a dull, non-reflective metal, with a single, jagged lightning bolt cutting through its center. It was an insignia almost no one alive would recognize. It was the symbol of a unit that had been officially disbanded, its records sealed, its very existence relegated to the darkest, most redacted corners of Sockham history. A ghost unit. Thorne walked past the base commander, past the stunned technicians, and came to a stop directly in front of Eve. He ignored the rank and the ceremony of the room, focusing only on her and the tiny piece of metal on her collar. The room held its breath, sensing that the true climax of the day's events was about to unfold. The rescue had been the action. This was to be the revelation. Master Chief Thorne turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the room before landing on the base commander, a captain who was still trying to process what had just happened. Thorne's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the residual tension like a diamond blade. "Captain, I need you to pull up a service record. It won't be in the active system. You need to access the deep archives." Authorization code, Thorne 7, the captain, a capable officer, but one who was clearly out of his depth in the face of this living legend, fumbled for a moment before relaying the command to a nearby yeoman. The yeoman's fingers flew across a keyboard, his face a mask of concentration as he navigated layers of digital security that were clearly beyond his pay grade. After a tense minute, a file appeared on one of the monitors. It was stark, mostly blacked out, with huge blocks of text replaced by the words redacted. "Read the name on the file," Thorne commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The captain leaned closer to the screen, squinting. "Read, Evelyn, Chief Petty Officer." A murmur went through the assembled SEALs. Chief, a rank of immense respect, earned through years of experience and leadership. Donovan felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He hadn't just insulted a civilian. He had insulted a chief. But Thorne wasn't finished. "Now read the primary service designator. Captain." The captain's eyes widened in disbelief. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper as he read the words aloud. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Systems Architect and Lead Technician. Project Hyperion." The name of the very system she had just saved. Project Hyperion. Thorne let the words hang in the air, a devastating silence filling the space where Donovan's arrogant jokes had echoed just an hour before. He then turned his gaze, as cold and hard as forged steel, directly onto Petty Officer Donovan. "Petty Officer," he said, his voice dropping to an icy, controlled tone that was more terrifying than any shout. "You were in the DFAC earlier. You asked the chief her rank." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle on Donovan's shoulders. "This woman doesn't just have a rank. She has a legacy. While you were learning to clear a room, she was designing the rooms you would one day clear. While you were running drills, she was writing the code for the artificial intelligence that runs them. She built the ghosts in the machine you fight for practice. She didn't just meet the standard, Petty Officer. She's the standard." Thorne then did something that sent a shockwave through the room. He turned back to face Chief Evelyn Reed. He clicked his heels together, his back ramrod straight, and brought his hand up in the sharpest, most respectful salute he had rendered in years. It wasn't the salute of a retired Master Chief to an active duty one. It was the salute of a warrior to an architect, of a student to a master. "Chief," he said, his voice thick with a respect that bordered on reverence. "It is an honor." The story of what happened in the Hyperion control room didn't just spread, it detonated. It moved through the Coronado base with the speed of light, a viral legend transmitted in hushed tones in the barracks, over encrypted text messages between team guys, and in stunned emails from the technical staff to their counterparts across the globe. By dinner, everyone knew. By the next morning, the entire naval special warfare community was buzzing with it. The details, as they always do, became embellished, growing more mythic with each retelling. Some said she hadn't used a keyboard at all, but had simply placed her hand on the console and commanded the machine to heal. Others swore that the lines of code she typed had spelled out the names of the original founding members of the SEALs. The story became a parable, a powerful piece of instant folklore. They gave her names: the Architect, Hyperion's Ghost, the Quiet Chief. Her legend wasn't just about her technical prowess. It was a potent and humbling reminder about the danger of assumptions. It was a story told to new operators as a cautionary tale. The person you dismiss today might be the one who holds your life in their hands tomorrow. For Petty Officer Jake Donovan, the experience was nothing short of a personal apocalypse. The public nature of his humiliation was absolute. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting not in a firefight, but in a contest of character. He spent the rest of the day in a state of numb shock. The next morning, he didn't go to the gym or the range. He sought out the Hyperion blockhouse. He found Chief Reed in the cavernous maintenance bay beneath the simulator, a space filled with the hum of servers and the smell of ozone. She was on her back on a creeper, meticulously recalibrating an atmospheric sensor array inside the guts of the machine, her hands working with the same steady precision she'd shown on the keyboard. Donovan stood at the edge of the bay for a long moment, watching her. Then he took a breath, walked over, and stood at what he judged to be a respectful distance. He didn't try to make excuses or justify his behavior. He simply snapped to the position of attention, his posture rigid. "Chief," he said, his voice clear and steady, stripped of all its former arrogance. "I have no excuse for my conduct yesterday. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and ignorant. I was wrong. I am sorry." He held his position, awaiting her judgment, ready to accept any verbal lashing she saw fit to deliver. Chief Evelyn Reed slid out from under the machinery on the creeper, the small wheels making a soft, whirring sound on the polished concrete floor. She sat up, wiping a smear of thermal paste from her knuckles with a clean rag. She looked at the young SEAL, standing ramrod straight before her. She saw not the arrogant boy from the cafeteria, but a man who had been shattered and was now attempting to piece himself back together with integrity. She could have destroyed him. She could have delivered a lecture on respect, on humility, on the history he had so arrogantly dismissed. She could have used her newfound legendary status to end his career or at least make his life a living hell. But that was not her way. The quiet professional does not gloat. Victory is its own statement. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze direct and analytical, and saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. She saw a teachable moment, an opportunity not for punishment, but for construction. After a silence that stretched for a beat too long, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood, Petty Officer," she said, her voice even and devoid of any lingering animosity. Then she turned her attention back to the complex array of wires and processors before her. "Now, hand me that 7mm driver. The one with the magnetic tip." Donovan blinked, momentarily confused. He looked at the neatly organized toolkit beside her, located the specific tool she had requested, and handed it to her. "This one, Chief." "That's the one," she replied without looking up. "The thermal regulator for this sector is misaligned by 2 microns. It's causing a slight harmonic vibration that could lead to another cascade failure in about 500 operational hours. Your team is up next. You want it running perfectly, don't you?" She didn't wait for an answer. She began explaining the intricacies of the system, not in a condescending way, but as a master teaching an apprentice. She talked about feedback loops, quantum processors, and the delicate balance of the code she had written 2 decades ago. This was her response. Not a lecture on behavior, but a lesson in competence. She was incorporating him into her work, teaching him with action, not words. A new chapter of the legend was already being written in that moment. The story of how the architect taught the hotshot SEAL that the greatest weapon in any arsenal is not pride, but humility, and that true strength is found not in breaking things, but in understanding how to fix them. The specific line of override code she had used became a piece of unofficial lore among the tech teams. A digital skeleton, key known only as the read key, and above the main console, a small, hand-engraved brass plaque appeared, put there by the grateful technicians. It didn't bear her name or rank. It just had 2 letters and 3 words. ER, COM, is a weapon. A year passed. The seasons changed over the Golden Coast of California, But a more significant change had taken root within the culture of the command at Coronado. The story of Chief Reed and the Hyperion Chamber had become more than just a good story. It had become a touchstone, a piece of institutional wisdom. The casual, reflexive arrogance that can sometimes fester in elite units had been tempered by a new, more thoughtful current of respect. Younger operators, fresh from the brutal selection process and filled with the fire of their own perceived invincibility, were now told the story as part of their integration into the command. They learned to look twice at the unassuming civilian contractors, the older NCOs in support roles, the quiet figures who kept the vast machinery of naval special warfare running. They began to wonder what silent legends and hidden expertise these people carried. The question was no longer, "What have you done?" but "What do you know that I don't?" Jake Donovan was a different man. The callsign Maverick was still on his helmet, but it now seemed ironic, a reminder of a past self. He had become a more measured leader, known for his calm demeanor under pressure and for his insistence on his junior SEALs showing respect to every single person on base, regardless of their uniform or job title. He often mentored the new guys, and he always told them the story of his own humbling. He never spared himself in the telling, recounting his arrogant words with painful accuracy. He always ended the story the same way. "I walked into that DFAC thinking I was the tip of the spear," he would say, his voice quiet and reflective. "Chief Reed taught me that the spear is useless without the master blacksmith who forged it, the quiet professional who knows its every strength and weakness because they built it from the ground up. I learned that day that I was just lucky enough to stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before me. And Chief Evelyn Reed? She was still there, still in her gray coveralls, still with her reading glasses, still moving through the base with that same aura of quiet, unassuming competence. But now, something was different. When she walked into the dining facility, a subtle ripple of awareness followed her. Conversations would dip in volume. Young operators would straighten up slightly. A path would clear for her to get her coffee. It wasn't born of fear or dictated by regulation. It was a spontaneous, silent, and profound gesture of earned reverence. They were not making way for a chief petty officer. They were making way for the architect. The legacy of that single afternoon in the Hyperion control room was not etched in brass or recorded in any official citation. It was written in the subtle shift of a culture. It was coded into the new way operators looked at the world, a change in perspective from arrogance to curiosity. True legacy, the story of Chief Reed proved, isn't a list of accomplishments stored in a file or a collection of medals pinned inside a shadow box. It's the quiet code that keeps running long after the programmer has left the room. It's the lesson that gets passed from a humbled petty officer to a new generation of warriors. It's the silent, unwavering competence that holds the line when all the loud, boastful systems fail. It is the profound understanding that true strength, the kind that can save lives and change minds, never needs to announce its own arrival. It simply is. The most dangerous person in the room is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one you never noticed until the moment they were the only one who could save you. The story of Chief Evelyn Reed became a foundational myth for a new era of special warfare, a constant and vital reminder that the heart of the warrior is not their pride, but their professionalism. It's a testament to the fact that respect is a currency earned not through demands and displays, but through quiet, undeniable, and world-changing action. The echo of her calm voice and the memory of her steady hands became a permanent part of the command soul, a quiet force more powerful and enduring than any weapon they could ever design. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent professionalism defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.